The glow of candles flickered across the polished table, casting shadows that danced like quiet ghosts. Plates gleamed with roasted meats and sweet pies, and the air smelled of cinnamon and pine. Laughter rang through the room, warm and bright, but not all hearts were light. What if the sweetest sip of wine carried not joy, but a secret thirst for revenge? On this cold Christmas Eve, the guests raised their glasses, voices full of cheer, unaware of the hidden sorrow that lingered in the corners. Among them moved Ruth, silent, her hands steady, yet her eyes heavy with secrets. She smiled politely, carrying platters of food, every movement practiced, every word measured. No one guessed the storm that brewed behind those quiet eyes, the quiet strength hidden beneath a lifetime of obedience. The candles flickered again, and the shadows seemed to whisper. In the warmth of the feast, the first seeds of something dark had already been sown, an unseen plan, waiting for its hour. Outside, the Georgia winter wrapped the plantation in silence. Snow fell in soft, cold flakes, covering the fields in a white shroud. The wind whispered through the bare trees, carrying a chill that pressed against the grand walls of the mansion. Inside, however, the house glowed with light, warmth, and the clatter of plates. Red ribbons hung from chandeliers, and evergreen boughs filled the air with their sharp, clean scent. It was a picture of joy, a portrait of celebration. But joy, here, had a shadow. The masters moved through the rooms like kings in a theater of their own making. Their laughter rolled over polished floors, a sound as sharp as broken glass. Outside the windows, the enslaved people worked quietly, hidden from the feast. They chopped firewood, carried water, polished silver, and they carried the weight of lives they did not own. Hunger lingered behind their smiles, and tired hands trembled with quiet frustration. No mistletoe could hide the chains that bound them. The contrast was stark. While the masters feasted on roasted birds and spiced wine, those who served them went without. Candles burned bright on the table, but in the servants' quarters, a single lantern flickered in the dark. Shadows clung to the walls like second skin, stretching longer with each passing hour. The mansion, dressed in holiday cheer, was a cage wrapped in silk and snow. Yet even within this gilded world, small rebellions stirred. A whispered joke here, a hidden glance there. The enslaved people shared secret stories, songs, and memories, small sparks against the cold, heavy weight of their reality. They knew the walls had ears, the floors had eyes, but still, stories grew. Whispers of freedom, of justice, of quiet revenge, curled through the air like smoke. And then there was Ruth. She moved among the guests with a steady grace, her hands carrying the feast, her lips curved in polite smiles. But her mind wandered beyond the glittering glasses, beyond the laughter that masked cruelty. She watched the masters as they drank and feasted, noting the small cruelties hidden in their jokes, the careless way they crushed lives under their feet. Every word, every gesture left a mark on her memory. Ruth had learned to speak softly, to bend, to survive, but bending did not mean breaking. Behind her calm exterior, a fire simmered. She remembered nights in the quarters, the whispered tales of old ancestors who had resisted in ways both large and small. A quilt passed hand to hand could carry a secret message. A song hummed under breath could carry courage. Ruth carried it all, the weight of memory, the promise of resistance, in her heart. As the night deepened, the mansion's festive glow seemed almost mocking. Outside, the wind howled around corners and chimneys, shaking loose the sound of the world beyond the walls. Inside, the table sparkled, the wine flowed, and the laughter rose. But behind the candle's soft flame, shadows gathered, and quiet plans took root. What few noticed then was that this night, so bright with celebration, held a darkness poised to tip the balance. A winter's chill had nothing on the cold that hid in Ruth's calm gaze. And so, the mansion stood, wrapped in snow and festivity, a place of both beauty and cruelty. The masters saw only their feast, their pleasure, their own reflection in polished silver. Yet behind doors, behind smiles, the seeds of vengeance had begun to grow, slowly, quietly, like ice creeping over water. A storm was coming, hidden beneath holiday cheer, and the first drops had already begun to fall. Ruth moved through the house as if she were invisible, though every eye lingered on her for a moment too long. Her skin, dark as the night outside, carried the light of the lanterns in its own quiet glow. Hands that had prepared countless feasts now held platters with a precision born of necessity, a grace that disguised the strength beneath. Each step she took echoed a life spent in silence, in service, in watching. Her days began before the sun rose, long before the masters stirred. The kitchen was a small world of its own, where the fire cracked and hissed, where the scent of bread and meat masked the bitter taste of toil. Ruth moved among the other enslaved people, exchanging nods and soft words, speaking in whispers that carried stories of survival. She had learned the power of quiet, of patience. Every glance, every gesture was a language of its own, spoken beneath the shadow of chains. From childhood, Ruth had known her life would be measured by what she could endure. She remembered the sting of the overseer's whip, the sharpness of a master's command, the silent suffering that no one saw. Yet she also remembered small acts of defiance, the courage passed down by those who came before her. A seed of rebellion planted in whispered stories, nurtured in shadows, grew quietly within her. Her strength was not loud. It was not in shouts or struggles that drew attention. It was in the steady hands that stirred the pot without spilling, in the careful steps that avoided detection, in the eyes that observed without revealing too much. Ruth had learned to survive by appearing obedient, by folding herself into the corners of the mansion, while her mind traveled far beyond the walls that confined her. The masters saw her as a servant, a shadow, a helper without thought. They did not see the storm that simmered beneath her calm, the quiet calculation behind her polite smile. She knew their cruelty, their greed, their carelessness, and she remembered it all. Every insult, every punishment, every stolen joy was etched into her memory, a ledger kept in the recesses of her mind. Yet, Ruth also carried hope. She remembered the songs sung low in the quarters, the stories passed hand to hand, the legends of ancestors who had resisted in ways that could not be seen. Those stories were her compass, guiding her through days filled with toil and nights filled with dreams of justice. She learned the power of patience, the art of waiting for the right moment, of letting the unseen grow strong until it could no longer be ignored. Even in moments of forced cheer, during the grand feasts where the master's laughter roared like thunder over the polished floors, Ruth felt the weight of another world pressing against her chest. She watched as the masters indulged in wine and roast, oblivious to the lives crushed beneath their feet. The contrast between the sparkling halls and the silent suffering outside them was almost unbearable. She held her plate steady, her hands firm, her face calm, but inside a fire burned. The quarters were Ruth's refuge, a place where whispers carried more weight than commands. Here she could speak freely, share a glance or a word, and find connection with those who understood the same burdens. They spoke of small victories, of tricks that caused brief discomfort to the masters, of ways to preserve dignity when the world tried to strip it away. Ruth absorbed it all, the quiet courage feeding the resolve that had taken root in her soul. And yet there was loneliness in her strength. No one could truly know the depth of her thoughts, the careful plotting, the desire for justice that simmered just beneath the surface. She carried it alone, in silence, in patience, in the meticulous planning of moments yet to come. Every polite nod, every lowered gaze, every obedient movement was part of a larger design, one that only she could see in full. The shadows of the mansion seemed to recognize her in a way no human did. They whispered to her as she moved, brushing against her skin like memory and warning intertwined. The flicker of candlelight cast long shapes that danced along the walls, mirroring the duality of her life. The obedient servant in plain view, the quiet storm behind closed doors. As Christmas approached, the air grew heavy with expectation. The masters decorated the halls, the fireplaces roared, and the wine flowed freely. Yet in the quarters, a different energy moved, soft but undeniable. Whispers of hope, whispers of patience, whispers of something more powerful than fear. Ruth listened, absorbed, and waited. Every small detail of the mansion, every habit of the masters, every blind confidence became part of her careful reckoning. She had endured for years, surviving the cruelty that others could not. She had learned the language of silence, the art of observation, the weight of patience. But inside her chest, a pulse beat louder with each passing day, a rhythm that spoke of a time when the quiet would no longer suffice. Ruth was not a woman broken by chains. She was a force waiting for the hour when the world that oppressed her would finally notice her power. And so, behind the smiles and the service, behind the polite words and the careful movements, Ruth held a secret as sharp and precise as a blade. It was not hatred for hatred's sake, nor was it cruelty for amusement. It was justice, slow and deliberate, growing in the corners of the mansion, waiting for the moment when patience would turn into action and quiet obedience would reveal its hidden strength. The shadows of the house seemed to lean closer that night, as if sensing her inner resolve. The wind outside whispered against the windows, carrying the first hints of a storm. And Ruth, moving among the polished floors and glittering tables, felt it too. The quiet knowing that her time was coming, that the mansion, with all its wealth and laughter, would soon taste the weight of what had long been denied. The mansion felt heavier as Christmas Eve drew closer. Each candle burned brighter, yet shadows lingered longer in the corners. The masters laughed louder, oblivious to the quiet tension that hummed beneath the polished floors. Outside, the cold wind rattled the shutters, carrying the scent of frost and distant woods. Inside, the warmth of the fire could not reach the corners where secrets stirred. Ruth moved like a shadow, careful and precise. Her hands carried platters, poured wine, and polished silver, but her mind traveled far beyond the dining halls. She thought of the whispers in the quarters, of the stories passed from one weary soul to another, each carrying a spark of courage, each keeping alive a memory of resistance. These whispers were not loud, but they were strong. They wound through the night, building a rhythm that matched the pulse in Ruth's chest. She had watched the masters for years, learning their habits, their weaknesses, their pride. They never suspected that their every careless word, their every cruel jest was noted and remembered. Every slight, every moment of humiliation was added to a ledger she kept silently. The master's laughter was a song, but beneath it beat a drum of reckoning that only Ruth could hear. In the kitchen, she met eyes with other enslaved people, and they nodded. Small signs, almost invisible, carried meaning. A flicker of a smile, the tilt of a head, the way a hand rested lightly on a broom, each spoke volumes. There was understanding, a quiet bond forged through suffering. Each one knew that the feast above them, the glittering tables and flowing wine, was a stage, and Ruth was learning to play her part perfectly, to move unseen until the moment arrived. Her thoughts turned to the wine, the deep red of it, the richness of its smell, the way it caught the candlelight and reflected it in glittering pools. To the masters, it was pleasure, indulgence, celebration. To Ruth, it became a tool, a vessel for justice. She imagined it as more than liquid. She saw it as a bridge between the years of suffering and the moment of reckoning. Each drop was a promise, measured and exact, waiting for the hour when it would be needed. The days passed slowly. Ruth observed the masters as they decorated the hall, selecting ornaments with care, choosing ribbons that shone in the firelight. Their laughter was sharper, their vanity more apparent, and with each passing hour, Ruth's plan grew clearer. Every detail mattered. Who drank first, who lingered, who glanced too quickly toward the kitchen. Every movement became part of a pattern she memorized, every habit stored in the quiet archive of her mind. Even in the quarters, tension grew. The whispers carried hints of fear and hope together, a fragile mix that could be shattered with the slightest misstep. Ruth moved among them, offering words of encouragement, listening more than she spoke. Her calm presence was a shield, a beacon in a world that had tried for so long to break her. She had learned patience, yes, but patience had transformed into something sharper, something colder. It was no longer enough to survive. Survival alone would not bring justice. Outside, the wind moaned through the trees like a warning. The snow fell steadily, covering footprints, hiding secrets, lending a quiet beauty to a night that was anything but peaceful. The mansion's lights glowed warmly through the windows, but that warmth was a lie. Beneath the glow of the candles and the laughter of the masters, something dark and deliberate was forming, something that could not be undone once set into motion. Ruth's mind returned again and again to the feast. The masters would be gathered, their glasses raised, their pride in full display. She pictured them laughing, their faces flushed with wine, unaware of the silent storm that had been growing in plain sight. Every gesture she made, every plate she carried, every word she spoke would be part of the rhythm that led to the climax of her careful orchestration. She remembered nights alone, when the house was silent, and she could think freely. In those quiet hours, she traced the path of vengeance, step by step. Each thought was precise, each movement planned with care. There was no cruelty in her vision, only justice, a rebalancing of scales that had been tipped for too long. The masters had feasted while others starved. They had laughed while others wept. Now the hour of reckoning drew near, and Ruth held it in her hands, steady as the fire in the hearth. The servants' quarters hummed with preparation too. Quiet murmurs of anticipation floated through the air. They shared glances, careful to speak in tones too low for the masters to hear. Each person carried a piece of the unspoken plan, each act small but vital. Ruth had become the heart of it all, the pulse that connected their courage to the moment it would matter most. Even as she worked, the mansion seemed alive with tension. The walls themselves seemed to lean inward, pressing closer as if aware of what was coming. The crackle of the fire, the clink of silver, the faint rustle of curtains in the draft, all spoke a language Ruth alone could fully understand. The house held its breath, and so did she. She paused near the wine, lifting a glass to her lips in practiced politeness. The red shimmered like blood in the candlelight, a stark contrast to the whiteness of the snow outside. In that moment, she felt the weight of history pressing down, the ghosts of her ancestors watching, guiding, urging her forward. It was not hate she carried, nor cruelty. It was the quiet certainty that justice, long denied, must find its way. And so the night stretched on, slow and deliberate. Each passing hour brought the mansion closer to the moment when the hidden and the visible would collide. Ruth moved with purpose, unseen yet vital, patient yet ready. Every smile she offered, every plate she carried, every glance exchanged with those who shared her secret, all were part of the rhythm of anticipation. What few noticed then was that beneath the festive glow, beneath the laughter and music, a plan had been set in motion that could not be undone. A storm was gathering, quiet yet unstoppable, wrapped in the guise of obedience. And when the moment came, it would not be a shout or a clash of swords. It would be something far more precise, far more haunting. Ruth's hand rested lightly on a tray, her eyes flicking to the candlelight. Every flicker seemed to speak to her, every shadow a confidant. The night held its breath, the house held its breath, and Ruth, standing at the edge of history, held the weight of her own carefully hidden strength. The hour of the feast, the hour of reckoning, was almost upon them.
The dining hall gleamed like a jewel, every candle burning bright, every plate polished until it shone. Wine glasses sparkled in the firelight, reflecting the laughter of the masters, rich and careless. The air smelled of roasted meat, sweet pies, and the faint tang of burning pine from the hearth. To the eyes of the masters, it was a perfect Christmas feast, a night of warmth and indulgence. But beneath the glitter and cheer, a different rhythm pulsed, a quiet, unstoppable heartbeat that belonged to Ruth. Her hands moved with practiced grace, carrying platters, topping glasses, and arranging the silver just so. Her smile was polite, her voice soft when needed, her movements almost invisible. The masters paid her no mind. To them she was simply a servant, a shadow among the candlelight. Yet in her eyes a storm waited, calm and deadly. The wine in their glasses gleamed like blood under the flames, a liquid promise of what was to come. The first toast rose, a cheer for Christmas, for wealth, for themselves. Laughter rang, glasses clinked, and Ruth's heart beat steady, her hand steady, her mind sharp. Every word they spoke, every gesture they made, fed into the careful pattern she had traced for days. She had watched them, memorized them, understood the timing, the habits, the pride that blinded them to everything but themselves. Tonight, that blindness would serve her. One by one, the guests lifted their glasses. Their eyes sparkled with joy, or perhaps with greed, as if the wine itself was a reward for their indulgence. Ruth's hands moved among them silently, placing glasses, topping goblets, each motion a small step toward the unseen reckoning. The candlelight flickered, shadows danced across faces flushed with warmth and hubris, and the mansion itself seemed to lean in, holding its breath along with her. The first sip passed the lips of a master, his laughter rising again. The second, the third, each taste a thread in the web she had woven. No one noticed the quiet tension beneath the surface, the way the firelight seemed sharper, the shadows deeper, the air heavier with expectation. Ruth's pulse was steady. She had learned patience, precision, and the power of silence. She waited, watching, feeling the rhythm of the room, and knowing that the moment of truth would arrive, not with noise, but with the stillness that follows calm before a storm. She remembered the quarters, the whispered words of courage passed hand to hand, the small victories of those who refused to bend completely. They had taught her the quiet power of observation, the hidden strength of patience, and the importance of timing. Everything she had endured, everything she had seen, had led to this moment, where justice would pour into the glasses of those who had never known it. The masters continued their feast, unaware. They toasted again, their words light, careless, full of pride. The fire crackled, sending a faint warmth across the polished floor, yet it could not reach the chill of what waited. Ruth moved among them, unseen, her presence folded into the rhythm of the room. Every gesture, every plate, every refilled glass carried her careful purpose. Then the moment came. A subtle shift, a glance here, a hand there, and the wine reached its mark. Ruth's heart remained steady, her lips curved politely, her eyes calm. The first signs were small, a cough, a sudden pause, a blink too long, but it grew quickly, unnoticed by those drunk with self-importance. Laughter faltered, glasses trembled, and the bright hall began to feel heavier, darker. Shadows stretched across the walls as if the mansion itself had sensed the change. Ruth watched, silent, her breathing slow, her mind clear. She did not revel in cruelty, she reveled in justice long denied. Each face reflected the cost of arrogance, each falter and laughter a note and a symphony composed by patience and resilience. The masters had feasted without care, but now the feast itself became a mirror, reflecting the hidden weight of their actions. The room descended into confusion, voices sharp with surprise and fear, glasses clattering to the floor. Candles trembled in their holders, shadows twisting across walls as cries filled the air. Ruth moved calmly, unnoticed, a shadow among shadows, carrying herself as though she had always belonged to this moment. The storm she had held within for years had finally broken, but it broke quietly, with precision, and with the full weight of the wrongs endured. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, carrying the first whispers of a winter night. Inside, chaos flickered and died like candlelight, leaving a heavy silence that pressed against the polished walls. And in the center of it all, Ruth remained, a calm figure in a hall of upheaval, her hands clean, her eyes steady, her secret power fully realized. The feast had ended, but the memory lingered, a crimson mark in the candlelit hall. The master's laughter had been silenced, replaced by a stillness that spoke louder than words ever could. And Ruth, moving like a shadow, left no trace but the story that would soon slip into legend, whispered from one soul to another, carried in the hush of corners, and remembered in the tremble of a raised glass.
The hall was quiet now. Candles flickered weakly in their holders, throwing long shadows that swayed across the polished floor. The laughter and clinking glasses of the feast were gone, replaced by a heavy stillness that pressed against every wall, every chair, every shattered plate. The masters lay where they had fallen, stunned, gasping, and trembling, the bright glow of the fire unable to chase away the shadow that had fallen over them. Ruth moved among the chaos, silent as a whisper. Her hands were steady, her steps light, as if she were merely part of the shadows themselves. No one noticed her, not in the confusion, not in the fear, not even in the panic that gripped the hearts of the once proud masters. She had done what years of suffering had demanded. She had balanced the scales in her own quiet way. Outside, the wind howled against the mansion, rattling the shutters and sending frost creeping across the windows. The night felt heavier, charged with a sense of judgment, as if the land itself remembered the cries and labors of those who had been bound within these walls. The silence inside mirrored the snow-laden stillness outside, a hush that spoke of endings and beginnings all at once. The guests who survived stumbled and coughed, their faces pale, their laughter gone. Some tried to speak, but no words would come, only a tremor that ran through their hands and shoulders.
They looked to one another in confusion, fear, and disbelief. What had begun as a celebration had become something else entirely, a warning, a reckoning, a reminder that actions, no matter how hidden, carried consequences. And Ruth? She was already slipping back into shadow. She moved through the hallways and corridors as if she had always belonged to the walls themselves. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the fallen glasses, the overturned chairs, the remnants of a feast turned into a tableau of judgment. But she did not linger. She did not boast. Her act was precise, quiet, deliberate. Justice had been delivered in the silence after the song. The mansion itself seemed changed. The walls, once alive with the glitter of decoration, now held a weight that could not be brushed away. Even the flames in the hearth burned with a different light, reflecting not celebration, but the memory of what had been unleashed. Every shadow, every flicker, every echo in the hall carried the sense of a story that would linger far beyond the night. Some whispered that Ruth had been seen slipping into the forest beyond the plantation, her form melting into the darkness as if swallowed by the night itself. Others claimed she had vanished through the walls, leaving nothing but the memory of her presence. No one knew for certain. Only the whispers remained, curling through the quarters and the halls, telling the tale of the woman who moved like a shadow and struck with the precision of long-brewing justice. The enslaved people in the quarters dared not celebrate openly, yet their hearts were lighter than they had been in years. Stories passed in hurried whispers, tales of courage and revenge that lifted spirits and carried hope. Ruth had acted not only for herself, but for all of them, a symbol of resistance, a spark of defiance that could not be erased. The legend of her calm power spread quickly, moving from lips to ears, a quiet fire that warmed the cold nights and long days. And so, the mansion settled into a new kind of stillness. The echoes of the feast, the tremor of broken pride, the silence of the masters, it all remained, heavy and undeniable. Yet somewhere, beyond the snow and the forests, beyond the reach of the firelight, Ruth existed in whispers, a shadow that would not fade. No punishment, no master, no wall could contain the quiet power she had revealed that night. The story of the Crimson Feast would linger in memory, told in hushed tones, passed from one generation to the next. It would not be a tale of simple revenge, nor of cruelty. It would be remembered as a tale of justice long delayed, delivered in the quiet, precise hands of a woman who had endured too much, who had waited patiently, and who had struck only when the moment was perfect. And in the silence after the song, in the hush that fell over the snow-covered fields and candlelit halls, the legend of Ruth's act was born. It would be told in shadows and whispers, a story that could not be denied, a haunting reminder that patience, courage, and quiet strength could change even the most gilded halls of power.
Years would pass before anyone spoke openly of that Christmas night. The mansion, once alive with laughter and pride, carried a quieter air, as if it remembered the Crimson Feast that had changed everything. Windows glowed softly against the winter nights, but within, the halls felt hollow, weighed down by the memory of what had been unleashed. Candles flickered, and shadows leaned close, whispering the story of a woman who had moved like a ghost and acted like justice itself. Ruth's name was never spoken in the dining hall, yet it traveled far and wide in hushed tones. In the quarters, in kitchens, among those who had suffered and endured, she became a symbol, quiet, strong, unstoppable. Her act of vengeance was not merely a strike against cruelty. It was a reminder that even in silence, the oppressed carry a power no chains can bind. The wine she poured that night became legend, a story whispered in every corner where courage flickered like a hidden flame. The masters who survived were changed. Some left the land entirely, their pride shattered, their laughter forever muted by the memory of a feast turned to reckoning. Others carried guilt in ways that no amount of wealth could soothe. And Ruth, she became a shadow on the wind, a presence in the whispers of those who dared to hope for justice. Some claim she vanished into the forest, swallowed by night and snow. Others said she simply walked among the people, unseen but never forgotten, a guardian of quiet strength and long-awaited vengeance. Stories of her courage spread across generations. Mothers told their children to remember Ruth not as a tale of fear, but as a story of patience and resistance. Every raised glass on Christmas carried the memory of her calm hand and steady gaze. Every whispered song, every quiet act of rebellion honored the woman who had shown that even in the darkest chains, a single spark could ignite change. Yet the legend was never simple. Some said her act was cruelty disguised as justice. Others called it mercy delivered with precision. The truth was, it mattered little. The mansion, the masters, the wine, and the shadows had all become a story that could not be untold. Ruth's actions lingered in memory like smoke, curling through hallways, forests, and hearts. The tale became more than history. It became folklore, a Gothic parable that haunted and inspired in equal measure. And still, the wine waits in the imagination of those who hear the story, trembling in the glass as if remembering the night it carried the weight of vengeance. It is a reminder that courage can be quiet, that patience can be sharp, and that justice, when long denied, often finds its own way. Even centuries later, the echo of Ruth's hand, the glint of candlelight on crimson liquid, and the hush of the hall after the song remained vivid in the mind. Perhaps the greatest part of Ruth's story is its mystery. No one knows for sure where she went, or if she ever felt the world would truly be righted. She became a shadow, a whisper, a legend, and in that her power endured, not in riches, not in fame, but in the memory of a single act carried out with precision, patience, and quiet strength. So when the wind howls through old plantations, when the snow presses against the windows, and when candles flicker against dark walls, listen closely. In the hush, you may hear it, the story of Ruth's wine, the taste of long-awaited justice, and the echo of a woman who transformed suffering into legend. Her story is not finished. It lingers, as all great legends do, in the tremble of a raised glass, in the pause after laughter, and in the silent, watchful eyes of those who remember the crimson wine and the woman who poured it. Ruth's wine was more than liquid. It was courage poured from patience, justice hidden in plain sight, a lesson for those who dare to see and hear. And in every telling, in every whispered recounting, the legacy endures, a reminder that shadows can hold strength, that silence can carry power, and that even the smallest hand, steady and unseen, can shift the course of a world. The feast may have ended, the masters may have fallen, and centuries may have passed, but Ruth's story waits, ready to awaken in every corner where courage lives, in every shadow where justice lingers, and in every heart that dares to remember the crimson wine and the woman who poured it.